In today's video, we are going to analyze the ongoing World Championship chess match between Magnus Carlsen and Ian Nepomniachtchi. This is the game two of World Chess Championship match, and here Magnus opted for d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight f3, d5, and g3. It is a Catalan opening, and actually it surprised me because it is not a bad opening or something. It's just Magnus has never played this Catalan before. I checked the database with White for Magnus Carlsen, and just it hit me that Magnus Carlsen has don't play this opening in 10 years. Just he has played it for 3 to 4 times as White. So here, Nepomniachtchi opted for Bishop E7, Bishop G2, Castle, D into C4, and now Queen C2. Uh, here, uh, Black would be retain his pawn, this pawn on actually c4. He is able to retain this pawn, but the next main continuation is queen a4, and after that a6, and now white can take this pawn like this, queen into c4, b5, queen c2, bishop b7. This position is considered to be the harmless for black. So we go back to our main position where queen c2 was played by Magnus Carlsen, and here b5 was played by Ian Nepomniachtchi. Instead, in past, a6 was used to play as the old main line, or uh, which is what white goes for nowadays. And after that, a4. After bishop d7, now queen into c4 and bishop c6. A rare style to improve the bishop over here. First on bishop d7, then to bishop c6. And here white has to set up whether he can go for bishop g5, eventually with the idea of capturing the knight and grabbing more space. Our bishop f4 is the second concept over here. So after b5, Carlsen played the move knight e5. It is not the most principled continuation. Still, I will say that a4 is the main move over here, and b4 is the move I feel Nepo would go for. In fact, this line is popular after Carlsen played it against Dingliren, winning the game in a style, and the game continued like uh, knight fd2, knight d5, knight into c4, c5, d into c5, bishop a6, bishop e3, knight d7, sorry, knight e3 and knight d7, knight into e5, e into d5, c6, hc8, bishop f4, knight c5, c7. In this position nowadays, rook d1 is the main move. But in that game, in that game, c7 was played, and after queen d7, knight d2, g5, the game continued like this. And in the long run, Carlsen was able to get advantage from this position and beat Dingleren. So instead of a4, b4 is the move. I have already told you. I have just analyzed it. And after a4, uh, b4. Sorry, once again, I am just continuously going over here. So in the game, knight e5 was played, and after that, c6 was played. After 10 minutes of thinking by Nepo, it was not that Nepo did not knew the move, but he was trying to recall that how to handle this knight e5 move. Here, knight d5 was another way of defending a8 rook. c6, instead of c6, knight d5 was another way of defending the a8 rook over here. And Queen into d4 can be met by queen c3. And in this line, black, white has an advantage because queen into c3, knight into c3, c6, bishop in, knight into c6, knight into c6, bishop into c6, bishop d7, and black's bishop pair and activity should compensate the material advantage of white. But I would say that white is better over here. So after c6, Magnus opted with a4. Knight into c6 is a blunder because knight into c6, bishop into c6, and rook b8. It is not really convincing actually for white because he's in back in development, and black is keen to trade off the light scare bishops with bishop b7 now, bishop to b7. So after a4, knight d5, knight c3. Surprisingly, for the second game in a row, we see Magnus sacrifices pawn for long-term compensation. It is not a coincidence, but I would say it is a strategy. Here, I played f6 because black needs to defend his b5 pawn over here. He wants to defend it with queen d7 to do so. First, knight from e5 should be driven away. So, Magnus played knight f3, queen d7, e4, a Catalan move, knight p4, queen e2, and knight d3. And the last moves were more or less natural from both sides. So here Magnus takes the action in the center by playing the move e5. And after bishop b7, instead of here f5 could be an option, trying to keep the center closed and play on the side where black has an extra pawn. After a into b5, c into b5, d5 to open up the center. E into d5, knight e1, knight into c1, rook into c1. Here, knight into d5, bishop into d5 is a blunder. Check. Because queen into d5, knight into queen, knight e2 check. Black remains with extra rook and bishop. So, that's why rook into c1. And bishop b7 and e6. And here, white has better chances because of he's threatening these two pawns on d5 and on b5. So we go back to our main move, which was played in the game. Here, bishop b7. Instead of here, if d5 was played immediately, then e into d5, I have already discussed that. So we go back to our bishop b7. And now Magnus took on f6. Bishop into f6, knight e4, and knight a6. Here, knight e5. Um, Computer says this is a W suit, but I think it is a better choice for Magnus Carlsen over here. Instead of here, the second option was bishop e3, knight a b4, knight e5 now, bishop into e5, d into e5, c5, a into b5, bishop d5, bishop into c5, knight into c5, knight into c5, queen into b5, bishop into d5, e into d5, knight e6, hitting the rook, rook f7, knight d4, and queen b6. And this position is still double edged, but black has two pawns over here, where one on d5 and the second one is on c4. But white has a lot of compensation with his pawn on e5, which has no offenders in his way. Instead of knight e5, the second option was knight into f6 check. But this lead to complications, many complications for actually white. The reason is the g into f6. Rook into f6 is actually a dangerous move because of knight e5 is the response by white. So that's why g into f6. And after that, bishop h6, rook f7, rook fd1. Here, knight e1 could be played, but after that, knight a b4 and bishop knight into d3. Uh, Black is better over here. The problem is that. So, rook fd1, knight a b4, knight e1, queen into d4, knight into d3, queen into e6. It is incredibly difficult to assess these types of positions on board. It is not an easy one. So we continue with our move which was played in the game, and that was knight e5. And after that, bishop into e5, d into e5, knight a c5 is what Magnus underestimated. I believe he thought that black is going to take the pawn instead of playing this move, knight a c5. So Magnus responded with knight d6, knight b3, rook b1. Bishop e3 was another version of a sacrificing the exchange, according to the engine. However, I think there are the options of Magnus. He didn't want black to remain with the knight on d3 over here, because knight into a1, rook into a1, knight into e5. If a6 here being played, then bishop e4, knight into e5. Now queen h5, knight g6, and rook d1. And here, white has a lot of threats for black. So after bishop e3, bishop into a1, rook a1, knight into e5. Now bishop c5, knight again d3, and knight into b7, queen into b7, bishop into f8, rook into f8, a into b5, queen into b5, queen into e6 check, king h8. And this position is round about double-edged one. White has a good bishop over here on g2, but black has also a good knight over here on d3. So after rook b1, knight bc1, rook bc1, knight into c1, rook into c1. Now I would like to stop in this position for a moment, and we wants to analyze that what is going over here. Let's see that black is an exchange and a pawn up. On the other hand, white has a powerful outpost on d6, where the knight has already been very strong and very prominent over there. Bishop on g2 is better than his rival on b7. Additionally, white rook is more mobile and can lift from easily from c3 to anywhere on the third rank. So here, black goes for Nepo goes for rook a b8. Nepo defends bishop b7 bishop over here, and eventually prepares bishop retreat on a8. After which he is ready to open the b file. This Magnus opted for rook d1. Now bishop a8. Now bishop e4. Now Carlsen prepares tactics on h7 square. Here, if the next move was knight into b5, is what white could have played also. After that, queen b7. It is not a problem, but the queen is still pinned because rook d8 now, improving the rook. And this is also better for equal for white. The position is equal over here. After bishop e4, this was a dubious move considered by the engine actually. Here there were different options actually for black. That was after b into a4. If happens, Magnus will go for bishop into h7 check, queen into h7, queen h5 check, king g8, rook d4. After the, lifting the rook into the attack, black's king seems completely vulnerable. So queen c7, black has to take radical measures, um, uh, complete measures to prevent the check fate. And Magnus could go for rook h4, queen into h4, queen into h4, rook into b2. At the moment, black has two rooks and two pawns for the queen. Normally, it would be enough material advantage to win the game, but poorly placed bishop. The problem is the bishop in this position, and that's why black would. It is a very complicated position. It may be a, I would say that it is a double edge. Black could might opt for draw, or white could opt for draw. It is this type of position. So after c3, now queen c2 was played. Here, bishop into h7 fails to work due to the c3 pawn. The reason is king into h7, queen h5 check, king g8, rook d4. Now c into b2, threatening queen. Queen h4, b1, queen check, king g2, c5 check, king h3, and now queen f1 check. And white is going to lose a lot of material over here and might be checkmated. Second option, for example, if Magnus goes for b into c3, would be a better move order, I think, because after b into a4, queen c2 now, g6 transposes back to the same game. But black did not had a chance of playing queen g7 over here immediately. So after queen c2, Nepo opted for g6, b into c3, into a4, queen into a4. Now black is the side to be careful, not to get into some type of very real trouble. So rook f d8, preparing c5, rook a1, c5, queen c4. Here Nepo said, I want you to trade the queens, but it is not in the white's favor, Magnus' favor. So he moved the queen out of the harm's way. Queen c4, bishop into e4, knight into e4, and threatening a royal fork over here on f3. So king h8, knight d6, knight returns to the place where it actually belongs, the a very solid outpost on d6. Because now knight f6, queen c6, queen h4, rook b7, knight into h7, and actually it is also a tactical move, and black would be hoping for a draw over here, finding a draw. So knight d6, now rook b6, queen into c5, rook b d8, going for the rook trade, king g2, a6, and now king h3. It was played in order to avoid the queen trades actually. So rook c6, queen d4, king g8, c4, queen c7. And here Magnus goes for queen g4 and rook into d6 with returning extra material. Nepro simplifies the position actually. Because after queen d7, then rook d1, again black's queen is pinned. And after e into d6, queen into d6, c5, queen into c5, queen into e6 check, king g7, rook into a6, rook f8. And now with the queens off the board, we will get to theoretically well-known Reich endgame. The remaining game does not require any kind of further comments. But I will show the game for you people, and that is f4, queen f5 check, queen into f5, rook a7 check, king g8, king g4, rook b5, rook e7, rook a5, rook e5, rook a7, h4, king g7, h5, king h6, king h4, rook a1, g4, king, rook h1 check, king g3, g into h5, rook e6 check, king g7. Still, it is a complete draw, dead draw position actually. g5, rook g1 check, king f2, rook a1. Now going for the checks from the flank, and now rook h6, rook a4, threatening the f4 pawn, king f3, rook a3 check, king f2, rook a4, and here is another fighting draw. Uh, After these two games, we could claim easily that the remaining 12 games we would see like that a very fighting ones. So this was the end of today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. Kindly hit the subscribe button and hit the bell icon button also. Thank you very much.